The mornings in New York always carry a very specific scent, something between cold air biting at your skin, the aroma of early opening coffee shops, and car horns blaring like someone was trying to wake up the entire city at once. I stepped out of the subway near Hudson Yards and pulled my coat tighter. It was the kind of cold that woke you up faster than 2 shots of espresso. Yellow cabs slid by, runners cut across the sidewalk, and tourists stood around trying to read maps as if they were written in ancient Greek. To me, all of it felt familiar, almost like background noise I had lived in for more than 30 years working in Manhattan. When I turned into the Hudson Tech building, the clock had just hit 7:55. I always arrived early, partly because I did not enjoy squeezing into elevators when the crowds poured in, but mostly because I cherished the quiet before the work storm began. People think directors love noise, love attention, love standing in the center of a meeting room giving orders. Not me. I like preparation. I like things neat, clear, and logical. 3 decades in this industry taught me something simple. Noise is not strength. Silence is. I pushed open the door to my office on the 38th floor. The early light bounced off the desk and hit the stack of documents I had left ready the night before. I had 20 minutes to run through my presentation one last time before stepping into the board meeting. An important meeting. More than important. I had spent weeks preparing this deck, numbers I knew line by line, projections I had personally double-checked no fewer than 4 times. I powered on the screen. The first slide appeared, clean and simple, just how I liked it. Title, date, and a small line at the bottom, presented by Evelyn Brooks. I picked up the laser pointer and tested it once. Everything worked. Just as I sat down, someone knocked. Soft, hesitant, the kind of knock from someone who did not want to knock at all. I had heard this knock many times in my management life. It never started with trouble, but it always led to trouble. I called out, "Come in." The door opened. Logan walked in. He had been with the company barely 6 months. Thin, slightly stiff posture, hair that always looked like it had just survived a wind tunnel. But what caught my attention was his face, like someone about to tell his mother that his bank account had $12 left. He stood there clutching a folder to his chest as if it were a live explosive. I looked up and met his eyes. "What is it, Logan?" He swallowed hard, then held the folder out to me. "Ms. Brooks, I have to give this to you." I took it and opened it. It took half a second for my eyes to register the content. A termination notice, with my signature at the bottom. A forged one, so poorly done I could have recognized the fake even if someone shook me awake at midnight. I looked at the page, then at Logan. My voice came out so calm that it almost amused me. They could have at least tried to match the handwriting. Color rushed into Logan's face. I saw the misery in his eyes. Whatever pressure he was under, I knew he was not the one behind this. I asked him one short question. "Who gave this to you?" He answered instantly, like someone who had been caught and saw honesty as his only escape. "The chief executive officer. He told me to hand it to you before the meeting." "I am sorry. I did not want to do this." I closed the folder. I did not blame him. If I blamed anyone, it would be the people who thought doing something dirty might somehow make them look clean. I stood, picking up my leather bag. "My badge is already deactivated," I said. Logan jolted. "How did you know?" "Because this was planned, not by me, but they think they are controlling the board." I stepped out of my office. Logan hurried after me. "Where are you going?" I looked back at him. "To the boardroom. The meeting will not walk to me." He panicked. "But your badge is locked. You cannot get into the elevators." I pointed toward the stairwell door. "I still have legs, and they work just fine." We started climbing, floor by floor. I could hear Logan's breathing behind me, uneven and frantic. Mine stayed steady, like I was simply on a morning stroll. On the 25th floor, he managed to ask between breaths, shoes slamming on the steps. "Ms. Evelyn, how are you so calm? I mean, they just fired you." I kept my eyes forward. "Because I do not like yelling in the morning. It is bad for the skin." I heard him laugh, even while gasping. He probably was not sure if I was joking. Honestly, I was not sure either. By the time we reached the 42nd floor, I stopped in front of the heavy metal door leading into the boardroom hallway. I turned to Logan. "If you are watching this story along with everyone else, tell them to comment on which state they are in. New York is beautiful today, but freezing. I am guessing someone watching from Florida is laughing right now." I placed my hand on the door handle, and when I pushed it open, I knew one thing for certain. This was not a mistake. This was someone's move. The issue was, they did not know I could play chess too. When the hallway door closed behind me, I did not step into the boardroom right away. I stood still for a few seconds, long enough for Logan to catch his breath, and long enough for me to fully feel what I had already suspected for weeks. This morning was not a last-minute decision. It was the peak of a series of signs that only people who have spent enough years, enough patience, and enough clarity would recognize. Logan leaned against the wall, still tense. He spoke like a confession. "Ms. Evelyn, if you walk in there now, they might not let you speak." Connor told the legal team to process every step of senior terminations fast. No delays, no questions, no sending anything back to the board. Everything had to follow orders from the top down. I looked at him. Logan said the last sentence without breath because of the stairs, but the meaning was crystal clear. The decision was not his choice. He was stuck between obedience and conscience. I nodded. I understood. What interested me more was the way Connor wanted everything to unfold. Urgent, hidden, without room for challenge. That kind of behavior rarely comes from confidence. It comes from fear. When someone tries to slam a door shut quickly, it is usually because they are afraid of what might slip through the light. I folded my arms and leaned against the cold wall. "Logan," I asked, "do you know why I am not surprised this morning?" He lifted his head and shook it. "Because this started a long time ago. They were just clumsy about it." I remembered the first sign. One afternoon 6 weeks ago, Maria from Audit stopped by to ask if I wanted to move the budget meeting to Friday. I could not reschedule a meeting I had never been invited to. I opened my calendar. My name was not there. I checked the invitation folder. Still nothing. A meeting that by company structure required my presence had happened without me. I did not make a scene. I simply filed it away in my mind and kept working. When a system begins to tremble, inexperienced people bang on it to find the loose screw. Experienced people wait for a second signal, and that signal came faster than I expected. A week later, I wanted to review the draft budget file, a file that I was the final approver for, but the system said I did not have access. I tried again. Same result. I called IT, and they told me it might be due to a system update. The kind of answer that means, please stop asking. 3 days passed. Nothing was fixed. I did not call again because I knew it was not a technical error. It was a warning. Logan swallowed hard, hearing this. He was beginning to piece the clues together. The third sign was anything but subtle. One morning, I ran into Blake, the chief operating officer, in the hallway corner. Normally, he looked me straight in the eye, talked a bit too casually for his role, the sort of man used to colleagues tolerating his weak jokes. But that day, he nearly slipped past me without looking up. "Hello, Evelyn," then walked on. Hands shoved in his pockets, eyes glued to his phone like someone trying to escape a chaotic family dinner. I watched him for a few seconds, then said to Mari, who was walking behind me, "When a man starts avoiding your eyes, it is because he made a mistake or his wife is upset. In this case, it is the mistake." Maria laughed out loud, and I simply noted it in my mind. 3 signs do not appear by accident. 1 can be a fluke. 2 can be a coincidence. There is an alarm system. From that moment, I knew a wave was rising. I just did not know when it would reach my door. I turned back to Logan. I did not know exactly what they planned, but I knew they were trying to block my access. Everyone who has worked long enough in this field understands that when information gets locked, people get locked next. Logan stared at the floor, voice smaller. "The chief executive officer told us the old leadership did not fit anymore. He said you were the first person who needed to change." I did not react. Not anger, not shocked. I simply looked at him. The reason he said that does not matter. What matters is that they thought it would go smoothly. Logan swallowed again. "So you prepared ahead of time. Preparation is what people on the outside call it. I call it common sense. When the world around you shifts, you have 2 options: pretend not to see or open your eyes. I chose the latter, not because I feared being pushed out of the game, but because I cannot stand people who cheat without even knowing the rules." Logan stayed quiet for a few seconds, then asked, "Are you not afraid? Being pushed out like this?" I adjusted my collar. If anything keeps you awake at night, it is not the person trying to slam the door in your face. It is the person smart enough to lock it without you noticing. Connor and Blake are nowhere near that level. The boardroom was only a few steps away now. I felt a familiar tension, something years of management never quite erased. It was not fear, it was the internal shift that happens when you walk into a room where 8 people will turn their heads towards you at the same time. I straightened myself. Logan watched me, unsure whether to follow or step back. I said, "You can go down if you want. From here on, this is between me and them." He shook his head lightly. "I will walk behind you." I nodded. A good choice, for him and for me. Right before touching the door handle, I spoke as if saying something casual. "If you or anyone watching this story is somewhere warmer than New York this morning, just leave a comment with your state. I am sure someone from Florida is smiling right now." Then I inhaled, stepped forward, and pushed the door open. When the door opened, the first sound I heard was Connor Reed's voice, steady and practiced. The kind of voice used by a man who believed that if he talked long enough, people would confuse volume with competence. He was going on about the future vision of Hudson Tech, something he loved discussing far more than any audit report. I once joked to Maria that Connor could give a speech about vision even if the company were burning downstairs. Sadly, I sometimes thought Maria believed me more than she should. The boardroom on the 42nd floor was wide, bright, and polished to the point that I sometimes wondered if it was built for people who worked or for people who liked hearing themselves speak. Long wooden table, leather chairs, glass walls looking out over the Hudson River, slowly lighting up under the New York morning. 7 board members sat stretched along the table, each with laptops, documents, and eyes fixed on Connor's speech. Until I walked in. The room froze for exactly 1.5 seconds. The kind of freeze you see in movies when the main character walks into a party, right as everyone is talking about her. No one moved. No one breathed too loudly. Only the steady hum of the air conditioner existed, as if it had no idea what was unfolding. Connor reacted first. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing. A mix of confusion, irritation, and misplaced confidence. He placed both hands on the table and leaned forward slightly. "Evelyn, what are you doing here? I thought you were informed this morning." I answered, still standing at the door. I was informed. But information is not always correct. He gave a small laugh. That half smile meant to appear polite, but only revealed the arrogance he carried like an accessory. "Evelyn, I am afraid you no longer have the right to attend this meeting. Your badge was revoked, and—" He did not finish his sentence because Logan appeared behind me, pale as if someone had pushed him onto a Broadway stage without a script. He stepped inside out of reflex, then froze when 10 pairs of eyes landed on him. Connor's annoyance was instant. "Logan, you do not need to be here. This is a board meeting." Logan opened his mouth a few times like a fish caught in shallow water. Then, remembering his task, he raised the tablet in both trembling hands. "I am supposed to present Ms. Brooks's termination document to the board," a sentence he would probably remember for the rest of his life. He lifted the tablet. I could see his fingers shaking so hard that the screen almost slipped. He inhaled and read. His voice trembled, but every word reached the board. "As of the approved decision this morning, Evelyn Brooks will terminate her employment immediately." And a few board members exchanged glances. Not a scandal, not shocked. More like people checking whether someone else received an email they did not get. I noted every blink, every furrowed brow, every shift in breathing. Connor crossed his arms and leaned back as if Logan's reading were proof of his own leadership. "Board members, I apologize for the interruption, but I believe this clarifies everything. Evelyn no longer has the right to be here. We should continue." He looked at me as though all he needed now was a polite smile to escort me out. But I did not move. I walked forward, slow and controlled, as if this were still part of my planned presentation. I placed my document bag on the table, neat, quiet, but with just enough sound that someone had to look. I said, voice calm enough to hide every emotion, "We will need this today." Another silence swept across the room. The first shift in the air, I could sense it. One board member straightened in her seat. Another set down his pen. Someone else stopped tapping the table. Small signs, but clear ones. They knew something was wrong, and they were waiting to see what I had brought with me. Connor did not like that. I saw impatience flicker through him. He stood, leaning over me, as if height could tilt the power in his favor. Evelyn, I am speaking to you politely. This is the final decision. Please leave the room. I met his eyes. Politeness has value only when paired with transparency. Without that, it is just a decoration for misconduct. I said it softly. The room changed instantly. Connor tightened his grip on the chair. One board member, Mrs. Sinclair, raised an eyebrow. Another tilted his head as if wanting to hear more. Logan still stood there, clutching the tablet like it was eating away at his nerves. I knew he wished this would end soon, but he also understood he was witnessing something far bigger than a termination notice. Connor's voice hardened. No one in this room asked you to stay, I answered. No one in this room has enough information to ask me to leave. A heavy silence sank in. Not the uncomfortable kind from earlier, the kind that made people sit still, just to see what would happen next. I pulled out my chair and sat in my usual seat. Not hurried, not defiant, simply sitting where I had sat for more than 10 years. One board member cleared his throat. Another put on her glasses. They were preparing for an actual meeting, not a vision performance. Connor glared at me, but said nothing more. He could not force me out without revealing what he was trying to hide. In that moment, I knew the board had shifted, not in victory or power, something more subtle. From this second on, they no longer saw me as someone pushed out of the company. They saw me as someone who knew something, and that was the first beat of the role reversal Connor never saw coming. I opened the file bag in front of me and pulled out a stack of papers clipped neatly inside a dark blue folder. Slow enough for everyone to see, confident enough that no one thought I was performing. I placed the folder on the table and pressed lightly along the edge to straighten it. An old habit, but this morning it accidentally became a kind of stage effect. I spoke clearly, without raising my voice, without needing theatrics. I will continue my presentation, even if Connor seems to think I no longer have a schedule today. A few board members lowered their heads to hide a thin smile. Connor did not smile. He leaned slightly forward as if ready to interrupt anything I might say. But I did not give him the chance. This part was not on the agenda before, but I added it this morning, I said. I think it will help the board understand the ownership structure of the company, especially the old provisions that many assumed were dead. I took out a folder stamped with the logo of Northbridge Consulting, LC. A simple logo, old, clearly not something thrown together in a hurry. I set it in the center of the table. Connor stared at the logo as if it were a foreign object. What is Northbridge? I have never heard of it. I nodded. Of course you have not. You were not here in 2005. I looked at the board. A few of the older members shifted slightly, as if the name triggered a faint memory. I continued. In 2005, when Hudson Tech was still a small Hudson Systems, we used Northbridge Consulting LC as the entity that held special share classes. When the company went public, most of the conversion terms were updated, but a group known as Class F Legacy Shares was not. I intentionally slowed down, clear and steady. I knew some people in the room did not enjoy being lectured. Still, others would appreciate me simplifying something that New York corporate law had written tightly enough to give 3 generations of attorneys a headache. I placed a sheet in front of each board member and said, Class F legacy shares are original shares issued to strategic advisors during the company's early years. They do not hold trading value, they do not carry dividends, but they do contain one provision, still active, never revoked, and never once triggered. I raised my head and looked directly at Connor. That provision states that if a senior executive is removed from their position without board review, all temporary voting rights tied to that role revert to the original entity holding the Class F shares. I tilted my head slightly. In this case, that entity is Northbridge Consulting, LLC, and I am the founder of Northbridge from the very first day. The room went silent, as if someone had pressed a mute button. A few board members pulled their hands back from their keyboards for the first time in the meeting. I saw the slow unfolding in their eyes, the kind that comes when someone realizes something too late, but just in time to avoid feeling foolish. Connor shot up from his chair and pointed at the folder. This is fraud, completely fraudulent. I did not flinch. I simply looked at him like someone watching a person misread a line on a board they themselves hung. Fraud usually happens when someone hides documents, I said. I filed mine openly with the state of New York. Anyone can look it up in the public business registry, as long as the company has not cut my access yet. The oldest board member, Mr. Halberg, folded his arms and looked at Connor. Not harshly. More like someone who had finally found the missing piece of a puzzle. Another member, Mrs. Sinclair, reviewed the document I had placed in front of her. Her eyes paused at the legal verification and the filing date. I saw her shift back in her chair and look at Connor in a completely different way than she had earlier. I continued. I never used Northbridge. It existed only to ensure the company would never fall into the hands of people who think they can cut corners without anyone noticing. Connor slammed his hand on the table. Impossible. If this existed, I would have known. I answered gently. You did not know because you did not ask, and you did not look. This provision sits in the original transition packet, the one you refused to read because, in your words, it was too long for a modernized company. A few board members coughed softly. I did not smile, but I did not hide the edge in my voice either. When you signed the termination document this morning without board review, the Class F legacy shares provision triggered automatically, meaning the voting rights tied to my position reverted to Northbridge. I temporarily have the right to attend, review, and challenge any executive decisions tied to senior roles. I was simply offering information. But information, in the right hands, becomes leverage. Connor looked around the table, seeking support, but the board no longer looked at him like a chief executive. They looked at him like someone explaining an accident he caused. I added, calm enough not to be mistaken for bragging. I am not someone who likes playing tricks. If the process had been followed correctly this morning, the provision would never have triggered. But you chose the fastest, weakest, and most foolish path. Connor exhaled sharply, almost like a gasp. All of this just because you wanted to make things difficult. I responded immediately, no. All of this happened because you believed no one was watching you. Several board members nodded, very subtly, but I saw it. They understood. They knew, and they were beginning to form bigger questions. The shift had already happened, and Connor knew it. The balance of this table no longer leaned his way. 2 months before the morning I stood in that boardroom, everything began with a feeling so small, so thin, but strong enough to make me stop in the middle of the 38th floor hallway. The kind of instinct a person only develops after many years of watching others try to hide something. The first sign was being removed from the budget meeting. I said nothing then, but I did not forget. I never forget inconsistencies. And when the second sign came, the locked access, I knew I needed to take a long enough step back to see the full picture. That afternoon after work, I left the building and walked along the Hudson River. The air was crisp, the wind off the water strong enough to pull my hair to one side. I bought a black coffee from the familiar cart and sat on the wooden bench where I often sat whenever I needed to think. New York in the late afternoon always had a beautiful sadness to it. Traffic flowed like an endless river, ferries moved like white arrows across the water, and the sky turned a blue-gray that made anyone feel a little smaller. For me, it was the one moment in the day when no one demanded anything, no one asked for another report, and most importantly, no one believed they could push me out of a meeting without leaving a trace. I remembered sitting there for a long time, holding the warm cup, watching the water shift colors, and in that quiet moment, I knew what I needed to do next. I went home, opened the small safe under the stairs, and pulled out an old file box covered in a thin layer of dust I had not touched in years. Northbridge Consulting LLC. A name most people at Hudson Tech had never heard and would probably dismiss if they did. But to me, it was a protective shell, built back when the company did not even have a stable office. I opened each document. Memos, bylaws, certificates, and old fax pages, so faded they looked like they had been photographed through a rainy window. It was the first time in many years that I reread everything, and I realized Northbridge had never lost its force. It was merely asleep. A silent legal entity, unnoticed, untouched, but still fully valid. I leaned back in my chair, arms folded, staring at the page stamped 2005. I did not smile, but I felt a deep calm settle in. The calm of someone who had found the key to a room others believed was hidden well. The next day, I met with my attorney, Mr. Garrison, who had been with me for 20 years and always looked as if he were contemplating philosophy instead of legal contracts. When I placed the Northbridge folder on his desk, he looked up, raising an eyebrow. I thought you let this go a long time ago. I took a sip of tea. I do not let go of anything that could help me in case someone else becomes suddenly incompetent. He gave a small laugh, just one small sound. Then he opened the file and read it line by line, slowly, as if reading an old score that required interpretation. Northbridge is still active, he said. You only need to reconfirm the information and update the representative. Then do it, I said. He looked at me for a few seconds, as if wanting to ask why I had awakened this sleeping legal entity, but he did not ask. He was the kind of attorney who understood that not knowing too much was sometimes safer. We filed the documents that same day: reactivation, owner verification, updated registered address. Everything was notarized within 3 hours. I signed each page, turning one after another, feeling as if I were rebuilding the steel frame beneath the ground that people assumed was too old to hold anything. I looked at Garrison and said, half joking and half serious, I suppose my chief executive officer thinks I only know how to write reports and review budgets. They forget I survived 4 generations of New York corporate law. He pushed his glasses up. No one lasts long in this state if they break procedure, I answered softly. I do not want anyone destroyed. I just want those who are wrong to trip over their own choices. The filings were processed so quickly that I had the sense the staff at the Department of State already recognized my name. Possibly true. I had filed far too many things over 30 years. That evening, I returned home, opened in the window, and let the city light fill the living room. Manhattan from the 18th floor had a beauty no one could fully describe. The horns, the lights, the constant motion that never slept. I stood there, looking down, feeling that only one final piece was missing. I was not trying to bring anyone down. I simply wanted to prepare for the moment someone believed they were smart enough to outmaneuver me. My job had always been predicting the weak point in the system. The funny thing was that some people in the company thought they were the exception. I spent 3 nights reviewing every legal link of Northbridge, not because I feared mistakes, but because I needed to ensure every page could withstand someone scrutinizing every word. I told no one, not a single person, not because I feared being stopped, but because I wanted to know exactly who would be the first to step into the trap I built. A silent trap, legal, undeniable. And this morning, when Logan brought that termination notice, I knew the moment had arrived. They had stepped in, and they had turned themselves into the main characters of a game they believed I was not playing. The air in the boardroom began to thicken in a way I knew well. I had felt this shift many times in my management life. It was the moment a room moved from order to controlled chaos, and one wrong sentence could make everything collapse. Connor was standing exactly in that spot. Mr. Halberg, the oldest member of the board, raised his glasses onto the bridge of his nose and looked directly at Connor. He did not need volume. His question was sharp enough. Connor, why was the board not informed of the termination of the Director of Systems Coordination? Connor wiped his palms on his pants, trying to hide the sweat. He spoke quickly, far too confident for the situation. I have the authority to restructure the executive team. This is a strategic shift. I do not need to. Mrs. Sinclair cut him off. Do not need to. You are referring to a senior director with a 10-year tenure. Internal governance requires all such decisions to be reviewed by the board. Connor inhaled deeply, trying to regain control. We are in a growth phase. I acted to protect the company from internal weaknesses. Internal weaknesses, I repeated silently. A circular way to avoid answering anything. I slowly opened my bag and pulled out the second file. I set it on the table, turning it toward the board. If we are discussing internal weaknesses, then perhaps we should look at matters far more concerning than my existence. I opened the file. The energy in the room shifted toward me. No one spoke, but everyone waited. I slid the first document toward them. This is a comparison between the financial report submitted by accounting 3 weeks ago and the version presented to the board last week. Mr. Halberg leaned forward, studying each line. Maria, from the far end of the table, straightened slightly. Mrs. Sinclair flipped through the pages quickly. I continued. 32 entries were modified. 25 entries lack cross-check dates. And most importantly, a cluster of expenses was consolidated in a manner that violates audit standards. I pushed the document closer to Connor. Perhaps you can explain why these changes were made without a single signature from the finance department. Connor glanced at the pages and responded immediately. This is strategic reallocation. I asked Maria to send the updated version. Maria spoke from the end of the table, her voice soft but sharper than any blade. I never sent any update, and I certainly did not sign these changes. A ripple moved around the table. Connor avoided her eyes. That was never a good sign. I opened the second file. Now, let us move to the Vanguard Delta Fund, a name that sounds legitimate. The only small issue is that it does not exist. I placed the printed evidence from the State Investment Registry on the table. Connor snapped back instantly. It is a strategic access fund proposed by Blake. I was told it had been cleared. I looked at Blake, sitting 3 seats away. His face had lost all color. He spoke softly, almost whispering to himself. I only forwarded the information from the partner. That was when I placed the third file on the table. I think you should review that partner information, Blake, because this is the email exchange between you and them. I projected the email thread onto the screen through the connector in front of me. The full thread, unedited, with a clear subject line: internal expense allocation and assurance of no audit for 3 months. The sentence I said next made several board members tilt their heads slightly to hear it better. Blake, your electronic signature looks like a mouse ran over it. It is not hard to identify. A few members of the board let out small laughs. Not because it was funny, but because the right sarcasm at the right moment can cut through a tense silence. Connor tried to regain the floor. Evelyn is twisting everything to justify being terminated. These issues can be explained if Mr. Halberg tapped his hand on the table, not loudly, but decisively. No if. What she has provided is evidence, and you, Connor, have not provided a single document. Connor began speaking faster, his voice slipping out of control. I acted for the future of the company. These matters were priorities. I could not bring everything to the board because we needed speed. Mrs. Sinclair cut him off. In 3 decades across 4 companies, I have never seen anyone justify inaccurate reports, a non-existent fund, and uncontrolled emails with the word speed. A younger board member set his pen down and looked directly at Connor. You said Evelyn was the internal weakness, yet you have not identified a single fault or failure on her part. Connor opened his mouth, then closed it. I saw the sweat forming at his temple. He kept trying to find words, trying to build a rationale, trying to grab onto anything that might save him. But rationale cannot save someone who lacks evidence. I spoke softly. Connor, you are free to verify every number I have provided. All of them come directly from our internal data. Not a single word is speculation. No one reacted, but everyone understood. I leaned back slightly in my chair. The truth never disappoints anyone. It only disappoints those who tried to outrun it. A 5-second silence stretched across the room. Those 5 seconds decided who held the ground at this table. The board looked at me, not as someone who caused trouble, but as the only person in the room holding the compass in the right direction. And in that moment, even before anyone spoke, I knew the entire balance of the board had shifted. I placed my hand on the final folder inside my bag, not because I needed it to win, but because it was the period at the end of the sentence. Every game needs a clean finishing move. And I did not intend to let anyone in this room walk away thinking what happened this morning was a misunderstanding that could be patched up later. I turned the folder toward the board. This is the last part. Very short. I pulled out a printed email that Maria sent to Connor 3 weeks earlier. A full report of irregularities and advance expenses, approval orders issued by Blake without audit review, and a clear warning that if these issues were not handled, the company risked violating the quarterly report. I set the printout on the table. Maria sent this to you. Did you read it? The air in the room tightened for a moment. Each board member stared at Connor, waiting to see what he would do. Connor glanced down at the page, then immediately looked away. I continued. The interesting thing is that this report was never forwarded to systems coordination or legal. Maria sent it directly to you 3 times, twice by email, once in hard copy, placed right on your desk. I looked straight at Connor. Why did it never reach the board? Connor opened his mouth, but no sound came out at first. For the first time that morning, I saw a crack in his expression, a real one, like a window pane splitting in the corner before the fractures spread across the whole sheet. I asked the next question as casually as asking about the weather. Where did you put that report? Connor inhaled sharply, his voice erupting. I did not have time to read it. I was busy. I had bigger priorities. I cannot read every report instantly. Mr. Halberg tapped his pen on the table, very lightly, but it sent a ripple through the room. You had time to terminate a senior director within 1 hour, but not 10 minutes to review an audit irregularity report. A younger board member added, and you call that protecting the company? I did not interrupt. I did not need to. Connor was doing that part on his own. Mrs. Sinclair picked up the printed email and flipped it front to back. Sent 3 weeks ago. Second time, 2 weeks ago. The final time was over 1 week ago. No acknowledgement, no response, no action. Connor spoke quickly, frantic. I planned to handle it. I needed time to review. I cut in, still without raising my voice. Time. Something you have whenever you are avoiding responsibility, but never when you are required to follow procedure. The room fell silent. That was when I saw Connor truly collapse. Not physically, not in anger, but in his eyes. The eyes of a man realizing every door around him had closed and the sound of the lock had already clicked. Mr. Halberg leaned back in his chair. I believe we have enough information. A simple sentence. But in a boardroom, it is a verdict. He turned to the members. We will vote. Connor shot upright. Wait. This is Evelyn's setup. She staged all of this because she got offended. This is personal. I looked at him calmly, then said, if personal means reading contracts, perhaps you should try it sometime. Several board members lowered their heads to hide their smiles. Another adjusted his glasses to watch Connor's expression crumble piece by piece. Mr. Halberg asked, all in favor of removing Chief Executive Officer Connor Reed under Clause 9.2. Hands went up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Not a single hand opposed. Even Blake, who had been sitting like a wax figure since the meeting began. I looked around the room. There was no triumph, no thrill, only the feeling of a door closing exactly when it needed to close. Connor stood there, gripping the edge of his chair. His face was rigid, but no longer defiant. He knew the road had ended. The board would not save him, and I had never been someone he should have depended on. Mr. Halberg spoke plainly. The decision is effective immediately. Connor, you will transfer interim authority today. Connor looked at me. His eyes held everything at once. Anger, confusion, disappointment, and above all, disbelief that the person he tried to push out was the one escorting him to the exit. I answered with a small tilt of my head. I told you. The truth never disappoints anyone, but it will make those who think they stand above it. Someone exhaled. Someone leaned back in their chair. Someone set down their pen as if they had just completed the final step of an unnamed investigation. And I simply sat there, my hand resting on my folder, quietly. The chief executive officer had lost his seat, and in that polished glass room, I felt a very distinct emotion. The quiet satisfaction of justice. Not the cheering kind, the steady, certain kind, like the sound of a lock sliding into place. Connor walked out of the room without another word. The door closed behind him, and the sound was soft but final, a perfect ending punctuation. The boardroom door closed behind Connor, and in that moment, the entire room breathed in the same rhythm. Not the loud satisfaction you see in television dramas, but the deeper kind, heavy yet soft, like a storm had passed through and left the sky clearer than what it took away. Mr. Halberg set his pen down and looked around the table. We need someone to lead the company during the transition, and according to the bylaws, the board has the authority to appoint a suitable leader. Then he turned to me. Evelyn. To be honest, you understand this system better than anyone in the company. You have held it steady for many years, and today you showed a steadiness very few people have. We would like to offer you the position of Chief Executive Officer. I had predicted this. I had sensed it from the moment they began looking at me, not as someone pulled into a fight, but as someone guiding them out of it. But I also knew well that the Chief Executive Officer seat was not meant for me. I looked at each face around the table, then spoke. I appreciate the offer, but I do not do my best work sitting in the highest seat. My job has always been fixing the fractures, not taking the front chair of the ship. A younger board member asked, "We understand. But if not you, who can the board trust in this moment?" I rolled the pen between my fingers, thinking for a few seconds. Some people lead for power, some for recognition, and some lead because they are necessary. Maria belonged in the third group. I looked toward the end of the table, where Maria sat with her hands on her documents, calm but visibly shaken by the offer made to me. I said, "I nominate Maria Ramirez." The room fell quiet for a few seconds, not because they were shocked, but because they were weighing the choice. Then Mrs. Sinclair spoke first. "Maria. She has never held a senior executive seat." I nodded slightly. "But she has been doing the work of those seats for 3 years without credit. She is the only one who reported the irregularities, the only one who hid nothing, the only one who put the company above her own safety." Maria flushed, lowering her head. I added, my voice soft but firm. "If we want a new chief executive officer, someone who can lead without breaking what is already fragile, someone who can see risk without looking away, someone who can speak truth even when it is uncomfortable, then no one is more fitting than Maria." Mr. Halberg tapped his pen lightly against the table. "Miss Ramirez, are you willing?" Maria opened her mouth twice before words came out. When they did, her voice was small but steady. "I will do my very best. Not because I think I am perfect, but because the company deserves someone who does not hide anything." A board member let out a small laugh. That sentence is better than 10 of Connor's speeches. The room let out a gentle wave of laughter, not mockery, relief. The sound of humans returning to themselves, not corporate armor. Mr. Halberg looked around, all in favor of appointing Maria Ramirez as interim chief executive officer. Hands rose. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Not a single vote against. Maria sat there with her hands clasped together, her eyes slightly wet. Not crying, just the weight lifting, like someone removing a stone from her shoulders. I tilted my head, smiled at her. "Welcome to the job you never imagined you would have this morning." She laughed softly, trembling. "Evelyn, I do not know how to thank you enough." I stood, rested my hand gently on her shoulder. If 40 years of work taught me anything, it is this. Leadership is not about sitting at the highest level. It is about never running when the truth walks into the room. She looked up at me, her eyes brighter. "I will try to live up to that," I answered, barely louder than a breath. "I know." In the room, the air warmed in every sense. The tension melted, the conflict dissolved, and the voices of people who had been worried for weeks finally sounded like they belonged here again. A boardroom meant for reason, not warfare. A board member walked toward me. "Evelyn, thank you for keeping the ship from hitting the rocks," I answered. I only did my part, but in that moment I knew clearly. That part had just kept Hudson Tech from stepping off a cliff no one wanted to admit it was standing on. I left the boardroom while the members were still talking among themselves, discussing the transition process, the legal steps, and the things no one in that room imagined would happen this morning. Maria was still sitting in the chief executive officer chair, head lowered, but her eyes brighter than the New York morning outside. I stepped into the hallway. The long glass walls reflected my silhouette at me, a woman who no longer belonged to this place but was leaving in a way that forced the whole building to straighten its spine. I felt a lightness in my shoulders, like setting down a suitcase I had carried for 20 years, simply because no one else was strong enough to carry it. The elevator opened with its familiar ding. I stepped inside alone. The doors closed slowly. For a moment, I studied my reflection in the cold steel surface. Calm, not winning, not losing, just finished. As the elevator descended, I leaned back lightly against the wall and let out a long breath I had probably been holding since the moment Logan appeared with that tablet this morning. Not exhaustion, release. 42nd floor to 30th to 20th. Each floor passed like an old chapter turned over, until finally the book closed on a story that no longer belonged to me. When the doors opened at the lobby, I stepped into the wide hall. Light poured in through the glass facade, bright enough that I had to narrow my eyes. Outside was the city I loved, strangely. Not soft, not comforting, but honest and vast, like an old friend who never says the gentle things but always shows up. Late morning, New York opened itself in front of me. The sky was clearer than usual, as if the universe had decided to adjust the lighting for today. Taxi horns echoed from the avenue. Coffee scent drifted from the corner shop. People rushed by. Others waited for the light to change. A few pigeons lifted from the steps like they had been hired for cinematic effect. I stood for a few seconds on the threshold, watching the flow of people. Then, out of habit I never wanted to lose, I pulled out my phone. There in my notes was the line I wrote 2 months ago on the night I reactivated Northbridge. Do not fight head on. Let them trip over the trap they dug for themselves. I looked at it and let out a quiet laugh, not a loud one, just the small laugh of someone who understands herself better than anyone else ever will. A laugh for the version of me who sat by the window that night, writing that line with a calm no one could see. I locked the phone and put it away. What needed to come had come. What needed to end had ended. Hudson Tech was no longer my home, and truthfully, I did not think it had ever been. It had been an arena, a vast one, where the strong survive, the smart endure, and the prepared never lose, in the way others hope they will. I stepped down the front steps and merged into the wide sidewalk. A breeze from the Hudson River brushed my face. Salt, steel, city. Not beautiful in a postcard way, but real. And today it was more beautiful than usual, maybe because I was seeing it with new eyes. Eyes no longer watching for who might be holding a knife behind my back. I turned toward the avenue, letting my shoulders relax. Not rushing, not calculating. For the first time in many years, I walked without thinking about the next meeting, the next report, or the next battle. Freedom is not quitting. Freedom is leaving at the moment you choose, not the moment someone else chooses for you. I crossed the light and thought that maybe I would buy a croissant at the corner. Or maybe I would go home, open the window, make tea, and let myself sit still for a while. Or maybe I would do both. Life after a morning like this allowed me that kind of luxury. I stopped and looked directly into the imaginary camera. The ones watching this story from their screens, maybe from a state 1,000 miles away. If you have stayed with me until now, then you are probably someone who appreciates the moments when the entire board shifts simply because someone prepared well and kept their mind steady as steel. I spoke softly, but sharply enough. If you enjoy stories where the game flips like this, subscribe. Because in the corporate world, we never know where the next battle is waiting. Maybe on the 42nd floor, maybe right at the elevator door, or maybe it begins with a document someone thought you would never read. I turned away and let the city pull me back into its rhythm. No looking back, no need to look back. Hudson Tech was behind me, and ahead was anywhere I chose to go.